Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. Whoa, the temp swings have been pretty crazy in the Minnesota area. I'd say that it has really screwed up my fishing and I'm pretty much over it. But that doesn't mean that it's all over just quite yet. And I'm gonna tell you guys why. I really truly believe that this November is gonna be the best November that we've seen in a long time, just based off our weather temps. If you guys pull up your guys' AccuWeather or whatever weather app you use and look at the extended forecast going into November and then look at what we dealt with the last 2 weeks, I would say that we still have the best to come yet, and you don't want to miss out on it. November smallmouth fishing on Mille Lacs can be absolutely fire, and the water temps that I specifically look for the best bite is going to be between 44 and 48 degrees typically. That's when I see the most fish in these wintering areas, and I mean there's tons of them. Last year we had a day where we had over 40 fish come in over 4 pounds, which is pretty fun. I don't think that anybody is gonna complain about that really. And you know, for the viewers that don't understand this process, I'm pretty sure that most of you guys do, but for the guys that don't understand this process, you got fish that are preparing to go a winter of eating very little. When the water temps get colder, the fish's metabolism really changes. As they get warmer, it gets higher, and as it gets colder, it gets less and less and less. So their body metabolizes food much slower. The fish understand this. That's genetically imprinted in their brain, and so they know that when it comes down, the water temp starts to get down there and it approaches that 50 mark. I think that those fish really understand that, hey, my metabolism is about to change, I need to feed up. Now, it'll push them into these wintering areas. And why would they go to these wintering areas? They're littered with crawdad everywhere. You know, we've dropped the camera down and have got to view this and seen this in the past. There will be crawdad literally riddled across the whole bottom, and they are going around and eating them up. And that's what brings them there. Now, one thing's for certain, we'll backtrack 2 weeks ago to Mille Lacs. A couple weeks ago, guys, we caught them really good. Like for probably 4 days, 3 days or something like that, we caught them really good because in that initial temp swing going down, the initial cold front that we got those temps below the 60s, when those temps first came in, we seen a massive pool of fish start pulling up into those specific areas, and we were able to catch them pretty good. I had a great guide trip out there one day, and then it slowly digressed as the days gone on. I think that what we're used to seeing is the temps are typically dropping a heck of a lot faster than now. So historically, you know, it'd be 50 some degrees for maybe a few days and then it keeps on going down. I don't think that these fish have seen where it goes to 52 to 56 degrees and kind of just holds there for a couple weeks straight in this time frame in October. So I think that has a lot to do with it. I think that once we get below that 50 mark, a ton more fish are gonna move into those areas and they will be biters. So I'm just kind of waiting my time out until that happens, but that's kind of my explanation of why I think that we haven't even seen the best of what's to come. I think that November is gonna be a fire month. So let's get into the bait lineup. You know, I'm gonna focus a little less on rods and reels on this one, just because you guys all know I'm selling all my stuff and we're getting all new stuff for next year. So I don't really want to get too far into it, but I will a little bit, but we're no deep dives, none, no deep dives. So the first thing that I'm going to start off with, she was definitely the star of the show of Bass in the Time season 1, episode 1 and 2, and that's going to be the Somatis Baits finesse football jig, the Tomcat. This Tomcat is the juice, catch a lot of them with it. It is a smaller football jig. So our traditional football jig is much bigger than this typically, the head's bigger. This is a finesse version and it is tungsten. So look at the size of this 1/2 ounce head. Now, if you guys look at that size of that thing is just freaking deadly looking for one, but it is tiny. Next, we got Mr. Tube. Thing that I do differently with the tube is I actually use a perfect net head with it. Not always, but on my spinning stuff, I like to use a perfect net head on it, and I'll show you guys how I rig it. But basically, you know, guys, one thing that we talk about tube fishing, I like to fish it one of 3 ways. And this time of year, the initial, when the temp is in that 50-degree range, I really like to pop this thing. You know, I like to pop it. And so I'm actually using a spinning rod and like popping it or stroking it, however you want to word it. That's the way that I like to fish it, and it seems to trigger a ton of strikes. I like using a spinning rod for it. I like using a lighter spinning rod, and I like actually having a lighter head. So I actually, underneath this guy, I got a 3/16 ounce, and that 3/16 ounce is the perfect size for popping this thing. Now, one thing I'll tell you guys right now is when it comes to dragging the tube, when it comes to dragging it, I will actually go into an actual tube jig, go up to like 1/4, 3/8, half-ounce tube jig. I'll use the same setup as I'm using for my finesse football jig. I'll actually just tie a tube on that with like an actual tube jig, half-ounce or 1/4 or 3/8, whatever, and I'll drag it with that. I think that when it comes to dragging, I'm more into the casting stuff. When it comes to popping, I'm more into the spinning stuff. So that's kind of my tube setup. 7'1", 7'1", extra fast, medium rod, perfect backbone for this technique. And like I said, I like to snap it. Don't be afraid to give these things a ton of action and trigger that strike, right? Next, now let me tell you something. This isn't gonna be one of my favorite baits to fish, but when I tell you that it's not my favorite bait to fish, I tell you this much. When the water temps get deathly cold, and you know, we're talking folks like, you know, 42, 43-ish, they aren't gonna bite very many baits better than this blade bait and that tube. And that's just basically the bottom line. Metal triggers strikes when the water gets cold. Caught my first blade bait fish, not my first blade bait fish, but first blade bait fish of the season last week. He's a 5-pounder too, but it was early for it, right? I casted it a lot. I'd only got 1 bite with it. It's still obviously early, but when it comes to fishing this thing, a lot of guys get it wrong. A ton of guys get it wrong. The guys that tell me that they hate fishing this bait and that they can't get bit on it or that smallmouth don't like it, 9 times out of 10 they're fishing it wrong. So I'm gonna show you guys quick how I like to fish this bait. Essentially, I lift my rod tip up like that much, literally. So I cast it out. I'm not making super long casts with this either. The longer cast you make, I feel like that's just more force for the bait to roll over itself. Use a sensitive rod for this. Use a sensitive rod because there are a lot of dead casts that you'll make with this if you don't. The bait might wrap a little bit, and when the bait wraps, the vibration will feel a heck of a lot different, if any at all. You might not get any vibration when it starts to wrap like that, and you want to catch that immediately. So using a really sensitive rod is definitely going to help that. Next, the Almighty. I believe that this bait catches them until the bitter end. I don't know if there's a better bait to fish this time of year, but that's the perfect Ned, right? That's my friend, the Ned. Anybody that knows me knows that I really like fishing this bait. It just gets bit hands down. Now, this time of year, I really truly think that those fish respond to a very plain Jane presentation. A very plain Jane presentation. They don't want it to be really wild and bulky. And sometimes that takes just like something so simple as that. You know, something just so simple as that and not moving very much. I think that that is key. So one thing that I like to do is either use like our Somatis Baits hollow tip worm. This is a Yamamoto Ned floater. I also use the Z-Man TRD. Just something that is very plain Jane. Now, if you guys have seen me before, sometimes I use like a trailer like the mini Ragers or like the TRD Tickler or whatever. Something that has like just a little imparted action. This does not. This is going to be for cold water and in cold water only. We're throwing it on a 7'3" medium fast action rod with a 4000 series Daiwa Tula. And like we said before, 10-pound test to 10-pound braid to 10-pound fluoro is going to get the job done. That's one of my favorites right there, but we don't need to deep dive on it. Next, we have a new bait in the Fall Arsenal. And I got this from one of my Canadian buddies up in the Kenora area. My buddy Eric Hodgins sent over a new bait, and it's an underspin. So this company is called TRM, The Real Method. And one thing that separates these guys' underspins from the competition is going to be that fluorocarbon tie going down to the blade. And I can promise you guys this much: we have stress tested the heck out of this bait, and definitely not afraid to take like a 1/4 ounce head and mid-stroll it over the top of their heads to try and get them to come bite it. As far as the stuff that you can use to use it, I have used this, a spinning setup, and you can use this on casting gear. And the casting gear that I was using was, I think it was a medium light 7'3" with 12-pound fluorocarbon on it, and that never bent out the hook once. We caught a lot of bass on it doing it that way. We never bent out the hook. We never had any issues with it, and I even risked boat flipping a 3-pounder with it. So that definitely worked. We didn't bend out the hook. Okay, so next we have a very popular bait, and it's being talked about quite a bit. If you guys watch, there's a guy in Minnesota, Bindi Vang, that I swear, like every video that I've watched with him, he uses a jig and minnow setup. So I'm playing with this a lot. You know, with the heads, with the baits, there's a lot to go through with this, and I think that there's gonna be a lot of different ways to use this technique. I think that there's gonna be some stuff coming up in the next, you know, year or two with guys using casting setups, you know, like a BFS setup. I don't own any personally, but it's something that I'm strongly considering. I'm strongly considering starting to use a casting setup for some of the bigger minnows that we're throwing. So, you know, anything from, you know, 2 inches, 2 3/4 inches, like the Great Lake Finesse little minnow droppers, all the way up to 7 inches. And you know, I kind of don't think that there's a happy medium. I really don't. I think that you kind of just have to look and play around with what works. Sometimes you got to be wild.
Got 'em.
You know, show them something that they've never seen before. Sometimes you got to get ultra finessey. So it's really going to be dependent on the specific fish that you're looking at. So I'm going to show you guys just kind of one of the more. I'm going to show you guys one of the more used setups that I've found. I'm going to tell you guys right now, I've gone through quite a few different ball heads, and this is kind of the head that I arrived at after using it for a couple weeks now. I really think that this is going to be the one that I'm going to use quite a bit. Now, this is the Queen Tackle Jig and Minnow head, and I don't remember what like the specific name is, but it's the Queen Tackle Tungsten Jig and Minnow head. And basically, guys, the line tie on it is sitting at about 3 o'clock on the head. Now what that does is it just gives it a little, to me, when you put the line tie and angle it back like that at 3 o'clock, one thing that it does is it lets the bottom part of this bait kind of sit a little bit more evenly in the water. It almost gives it a little bit of buoyancy in the back, and it kind of makes it off keel. It really helps the bait sit more horizontal in the water. So watch this. So when you see this bait sit like this, and you just put a little bit of pressure on the head, look at how it wants to come up. You know, and that's what makes it really cool, is just the way that head. So what do you guys think's happening in the water? Obviously, where the weight is in the head, it's gonna want to push it down like that. And so what you got when you put pressure on that line and pull up, and that head gets downwards, because it's going to naturally do that because it weighs more, all of a sudden you have a horizontal presentation, and you start flicking it, and she looks right. So that's kind of where I'm going with this, is that this is kind of the setup that I've found, and just a couple different minnows that I like to use. You know, I like using the depth Sakamata shad, 5-incher. These are awesome. These are awesome baits to use. And then this is another one that I've been using, the Raid Super Fish Stroller 5-inch. I really like these baits, and what I like about the Queen Tackle Jig is it comes with several different size hooks. That's a 4-aught, and it sits pretty dang good in this 5-inch bait, I think personally. I think that has a good placement in the bait. And one thing that I was doing, guys, at the very beginning of the season was I was using more of a lighter head I was using a smaller hook because that's all I could find in some of the heads, and I missed a lot of fish. They bump it, and I just think that when you use these 5, 6, 7-inch baits, the key 9 times out of 10 is going to be that hook. It needs to be the right hook, it needs to be long enough, and those are going to help you land the fish and not just get strikes on it. Now, the next thing too, one thing that I figured out, and I think that, you know, it's a trending deal, is that for shaking a minnow, I think that a shorter rod is going to be key. You need to have backbone in the rod. It can't be super whippy and parabolic. You need to be able to feel that bite, and it needs to grab immediately. So when you feel that initial strike and you go to set the hook, there can't be a ton of cushiness. In order for that hook to grab tissue, it needs to have that quick reaction. So I think that having a faster rod, faster tip, is going to land you a lot more fish and get better hook placement in fish. All right, so all the products in this video, I'll put a link down below. As you guys know, I have a lot of stuff for sale, a ton of it, like a lot of stuff for sale. I need to update that list. I've been super busy, that's my bad. But I'm gonna update that list for you guys, and I want you guys to hit me up if you guys are interested in any of the stuff that we have for sale. Everything on the boat is going, and I just appreciate all the viewership, man. I appreciate you guys big time for tuning in. Without there being the amount of viewership that we've had, I wanted the channel to grow, and without that growth, I probably wouldn't do it. So we keep on growing, and that's a great thing. I love that. All the information below. Until next time, boys, you know where you'll find me. Find me on the water. Stay tuned for another episode of Bass in the Time coming up right around the corner. Let's go. Oh my God, that was so violent, bro. That was so violent.